What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Got another 2-hour mega mix of new stories for you. If you guys are enjoying these long 2-hour videos, please make sure you're liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing if you enjoy them after you're done with the video. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in the video or anything else, please be sure to leave those in the comments, as those are my favorite part of making these sorts of videos. Plus, all that stuff really helps out with the algorithm, so I can afford to make these longer videos as much as possible. They've been doing pretty well so far, so if we can get another 1,000 likes or so, I would be really happy with that. Either way though, guys, I will see you at the outro at the end of the video, and I hope you guys enjoy the next 2 hours of scary story goodness. Have a great day. This took place back in 2015, when I was much younger. It was the only time that I really used a dating app. I was single and decided to give one a try. I don't even recall which one it actually was. When I went on, I matched with a guy pretty quickly. We started talking, and based on his profile and the conversation, things were going pretty well so far. The guy's name was Derek. He appeared to be tall, strong, and had blondish hair. We chatted about basic stuff, getting to know each other a little bit. After about a day and a half of this conversation, he asked me to hang out with him. Now, I did think this was maybe a little bit too soon, but I was kind of bored and didn't really have anything else going on. I felt like being a bit spontaneous back then and doing something right away. Looking back, I was just immature and dumb though. I thought, why not? I said yes. Derek then said I should come over to his place that very same day. This is when I got a slightly stronger feeling that maybe this was a bad idea. Even back then, I knew it was probably smart to meet somebody for the first time in a public location. I felt really confident I knew him, even though we hadn't even sent any pictures back and forth to each other, nor even called each other on the phone yet. I said okay, and he sent me his address. He told me to come over soon. He was quite bored and not doing anything at the moment. He said we could watch a movie and order pizza or something. I told him that sounded good. I was only going to stay for a couple of hours at most though. It was around 7 or 8 p.m. at this point in time, so I got ready and copied his address. I pasted it into Google Maps for directions. The location was about 10 minutes away. I followed the directions and they led me to a quiet-looking street that was pretty dark. I was then told to turn even further in. I did, but was very confused. I was turning into the parking lot of a small, run-down-looking motel. I was both angry and somewhat nervous now. Why was Derek telling me to meet him in this creepy motel? He'd told me I was going to his place. I wanted to just turn around and leave right then, and I probably should have. Instead, I pulled into one of the parking lot spaces, facing the motel. There were 2 floors to this motel, and about 20 rooms in total, roughly 10 on each level. The parking lot was basically one long row of spaces facing the motel rooms. Then there was a sidewalk in between. There were only 5 other cars in the lot, so not many people were staying there. After parking my car, I looked at the rooms and saw lights appear to be on in a few, but not many. There were also curtains covering just about every window. I stayed in my car and took out my phone. I texted Derek on the dating app. "You didn't tell me you were at a motel." He said he was sorry and claimed he didn't want to scare me off, but really wanted to see me. He said he was only staying in the motel for a couple days until he could start the new lease for his apartment. He also claimed that all of his stuff was at a nearby storage unit, and his last apartment lease had ended sooner than he thought it would. It was a complicated mess of explanations, but I understood his basic point. He was just staying there while he moved from one place to another. I sort of believed him because he had been so nice up to that point. That was foolish of me. I told him this motel seemed really sketchy. He said he knew that, but it was all he could afford given the situation of his rent and the deposit on his upcoming apartment. He then asked me to come inside and told me the number of his room. I looked at it and saw it was one of the few with lights on. It was on the ground level, a little ways to my left. I sat there in my car thinking about it for a moment. I tried to tell myself the fear I had was more than likely nothing. It was natural to feel creeped out by an old motel like this. I sat in my car thinking about what to do. I decided to at least check things out. The story he gave me seemed to be believable. I opened my door and stepped out. When I shut my door and was beginning to walk, though, something caught my eye from a window. I looked over to see a guy peeking out the window Derek had given me for his motel room, but it was not Derek looking out. After less than 1 second, whoever this guy was ducked down and covered the window back up with the curtain. Even though I saw him very briefly, I knew for certain it was not Derek. He looked nothing like the pictures. I assumed that somebody was there with him. I stopped where I was and got on my phone. I texted him, asking who was inside the room. He responded immediately, saying nobody else was there. The bad feeling I had got worse. I knew I had to leave right now. I walked back to my car and told Derek I'd seen somebody in his window, and it clearly was not him. He said something like, "No you didn't, come on in already." I had already made up my mind at that point though. I was going to leave. I got back inside my car and drove away. I went back home and blocked Derek on everything. I realized how lucky I was not to enter that room after looking back at the situation. I also realized how stupid I was. I'm glad I was able to learn from it. I don't know if that was a catfish and the person I saw was pretending to be Derek, or if that was just a random innocent person's room who Derek was pretending was his. Either way, that was my worst experience using a dating app. This July will mark the 6th wedding anniversary of my husband and I. I just want to say for the record that I'm incredibly happy. Marrying him was the best decision I ever made in my life. Now that I've said that, though, I will say we almost never even made it to our wedding day because of a poor choice made by my then fiancé. Anybody who's ever gotten married knows it's an obnoxious amount of planning. Even weddings on a smaller scale can cost a lot of money and take many months of preparation. I was stressed out of my mind trying to plan this wedding. I told my fiancé just to worry about the photographer and I'd take care of basically everything else. I think it's also worth saying that I wanted it that way. I love the guy to death, but if it was up to him, we'd have some tacos and 80 music and nothing else. That may sound like a fun party, but for a wedding, not so sure. I gave him a list of great photographers I'd seen online or recommended to me by my coworkers and friends. All he had to do was pick one he liked from our budget, and everything else would be taken care of. One night, he came home from work excited, like he'd just won us the lottery. He told me he had been talking to a coworker of his, and the man suggested he knew someone he knows to be the photographer. The guy was well under our budget and shot weddings before. I didn't love the idea because I didn't see any portfolios or anything like that. I didn't even know if this guy actually had a camera. My fiancé assured me that he saw his work and that he'd done a good job. The only reason he wasn't listed anywhere online was because he did it as a side gig. He was just trying to make some extra money and eventually hopefully turn it into a career. I was instantly sketched out by the idea, but I trusted my man. My husband, then fiancé, has a great and horrible quality about him that allows him to always see the good in people, even if that's not such a good thing itself. Like I said, I wasn't too thrilled, but what's done is done. I guess the one positive was that we were saving quite a lot of money on this guy. Not far from the wedding, I still hadn't even met the guy yet. I was starting to get a little bit anxious. What if this guy didn't show up or something? I begged my fiancée to at least set up a meeting so I could meet the guy and discuss things with him. We met at the park where we were going to get married. This guy was just very strange. That might sound mean, but he just gave off that vibe. He was gross. Dirty, long, unclipped fingernails. He was missing some teeth in the front. I would guess he was at least 40 years old. Based on the way my fiancé had described him to me, I was picturing a young upstart, not some grizzled old guy. The man didn't say much and just kind of nodded along with whatever I said. I felt uncomfortable. It seemed like he was giving me quite strange looks. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining it because his appearance was a little bit off. I just couldn't shake that feeling though. He ended the meeting by showing me some pictures he had taken for his portfolio. I expected to see some wedding photos, but they were weird. They were some sort of strange artsy photos of dead animals and buildings on fire and things like that. He showed me some wedding photos at the end, and admittedly, they were beautiful shots. That at least put me a little bit at ease. About a month away from the wedding, my girls and I went to Ocean City, Maryland for the bachelorette party. We rented a beautiful condo on the ocean and planned on spending the days on the beach and the nights partying in town. It was an amazing time until late Saturday afternoon. While we were on the beach, one of my friends said she could see some creepy guy seemingly taking photos of us. The guy was standing outside the building facing us. There was a lot of distance between the beach and the man, so I assumed he was just taking picturesque photos of the ocean or something. My friends couldn't relax though. Finally, one of them got up and said she was going to confront this guy just for some peace of mind. She and another friend walked all the way over to the man. I could see them talking, and after a moment, the man walked away. My friends walked back to us. She said that he was just taking pictures of the ocean. He even showed them to her. He apologized for freaking them out and said he would walk further down and take the pictures there. I smiled and said, "See, I told you." It wasn't until we were walking back that one of my friends said something that really freaked me out though. She said the photographer gave her a kind of creepy vibe and that his fingernails were long, unclipped, and disgusting. Right away, I thought about our photographer for the wedding. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but the feeling in my gut said it was anything but. That night, we went to one of the local bars, and every time I saw someone take a picture, I felt my adrenaline kick in. The longer the night went, the more freaked out I became. I told the girls I wanted to go back to the condo, and when we got back, we decided to make some drinks there and just talk. Around 1 a.m., we heard a knock on the back door. We all looked at each other in disbelief. There was no way someone was knocking at this time, right? We weren't being loud enough to get a noise complaint or anything. We all huddled around the door. When we looked out, nobody was there. We thought that either some kids must be playing a joke on us, or we were all collectively going nuts. We decided to just go to bed. Not long after that moment, about 30 or 40 minutes later, I suddenly heard one of my friends begin screaming. She had been sleeping on the couch since we were one bedroom short. As we all rushed into the living room to see what was going on, there was some guy standing there with a camera. I was stunned at what I was seeing. It was my wedding photographer, standing there in the living room. Through all the chaos, he just kept saying, "I figured you guys would want some pictures of the memories. I'm just trying to take some pictures, so relax." One of my friends grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started to chase the man out of the condo. We immediately called the authorities and explained everything to them. The following day, we returned home, and I angrily recounted the incident to my fiancé. While I understand that he couldn't have known and it wasn't really his fault, I was a bit upset with him in the moment. The local police were informed, and before long, the man responsible was apprehended. His excuse was that he was merely attempting to take our pictures and didn't intend to frighten us or break in. Didn't hold up, fortunately. We managed to find another photographer in time for the wedding, and I realized that my fiance wasn't really to blame. There's no way he could have known the guy was like that. My advice, though, to young couples planning weddings is to always ensure that you're familiar with the individuals you hire, because sometimes trying to save some money can turn out to be a very bad decision. This happened when I was driving home from work about a year ago. It was very late at night, and I was driving on a quiet road. It usually took me about 20 minutes to arrive back, and this drive was going just like any other so far. After I exit the highway, I drive on a quieter road for about 5 miles. This road mostly has nothing but wilderness on both sides. While I was driving down this road, I saw some red and blue flashing lights up ahead. I assumed that the police had pulled somebody over or something. The closer I got, though, the more I could actually see. Soon, I realized there was somebody standing on the side of the road. This person was wearing a safety vest and looked sort of like a police officer. I slowed down and made it even closer to the car with flashing lights. It did not appear to be a police vehicle, though. It looked like a regular car with flashing lights on it. The man standing in the road started walking across. As I got closer and slowed down even more, he motioned for me to stop altogether. I did. I was very curious as to what this was about. This particular area was very rural and just kind of woods on both sides of the road. At this point, after stopping, I rolled down my window to see what the guy wanted. He had dark hair and was wearing a black cap and black jacket with his vest. He also had a flashlight and shined it in at my face, nearly blinding me. He said hi and told me his name. I forgot what it actually was, though. The man spoke kind of fast and told me they were conducting some searches around here. Apparently, it was going on in other nearby roads as well. I wasn't really sure why he was doing this, though. I asked him why he was searching vehicles coming down this road. He said there had been some criminal activity in the area, and they were looking for the perpetrator. I asked him if he was with the police, and he told me he was not. He was working to help them, though. The man then asked me if he had consent to search the back of my car, and told me to unlock the back doors and trunk. He started moving back and was about to grab my back door handle. I said no and slammed my foot on the gas. I drove away from him, and I could hear him yelling at me, telling me to wait, as I left him standing there in the middle of the road. Clearly, this guy had nothing to do with the police. Who knew what he was going to do if I unlocked the car for him? He didn't give me any real details. He just skimmed over everything. I immediately dialed 911 and reported this suspicious activity to the police. I was told an officer would head to the location and check it out ASAP. After that, I finished my drive home. I made it back. I really hope that nobody else actually stopped for that guy. I'm not sure exactly what his plan was. To say there was illegal activity in the area was so broad, unless he was talking about himself. It seemed like a lie to get me to open my doors for him. Since then, nothing else like that has happened. I really hope the police actually found the guy, so he can't try that sort of thing ever again. Ask anyone working in fast food if it's something they enjoy. The answer will always be no. The reasons might not be as concerning as mine are, but the opinion is usually the same. I was 20 years old and had just gotten a job at a local fast food place that wasn't one of those chain restaurants. That also meant it wasn't exactly run very well. Only on my third day, I was left alone after 8 p.m. to close the restaurant by myself. I didn't like the feeling of being there alone. It was a pretty small town though, and there were only 3 hours left to my shift. I was just waiting at the counter for someone to come in and order something. But no one came in for at least an hour after being there alone. I heard the door eventually open, and the bell that was hanging on the handle started to ding. I looked up from my phone, and my heart just dropped immediately. Standing only a few feet away from me was a very large, very disheveled-seeming homeless man. Now don't judge me for being scared. Most young women would be scared of the presence of any giant guy alone, let alone one who looked like he'd been living on the streets for half a decade. I was, of course, still very polite to him. He walked up to the counter, and I had to hold off from gagging from the smell radiating off this guy's body. He was very soft-spoken, which eased my nerves a little bit, but I still felt uneasy about the situation. He ordered a burger and some fries, and I got to making it right away. As I walked a couple of steps back into the kitchen, though, he must have taken note that I hadn't called out the order for anyone else to make it. "Are you here alone tonight, sweetie?" My whole body lit up with chills. I told him that of course I was not there alone. My coworkers were just having a smoke break out back. He obviously didn't buy it, though. "Don't lie to me, darling. There's nobody back there." I started to get extremely uncomfortable. I wanted nothing more than for this man to go away and leave me alone. Unfortunately, I already knew that wasn't going to be happening anytime soon. Thankfully, just as the man began approaching the counter again, a woman and her 2 kids walked in. He saw them and stepped back and sat down at a table. It had direct line of sight into the kitchen. I guess he wanted to make sure he could see me at all times. Let me tell you, feeling his eyes constantly on me did not feel good. Although I was thoroughly creeped out, he hadn't done anything wrong yet, so I couldn't ask him to leave. The woman ordered some food for herself and her children. I was praying the whole time she'd get it for dine-in. But I guess I just couldn't be that lucky. She got it as takeout. I know it wasn't the best thing to do, but I spent as long as humanly possible making her food. I finished the man's first and called his name to pick up from the counter. He rushed over and did something so gross. I can't really tell you the reason why. Just as I was setting his tray down on the counter, he leaned over and breathed heavily in my face. This time I couldn't suppress the gag. In fact, I started dry heaving. The man didn't take offense, though. He actually smirked at me, like he was happy about me gagging. The woman asked if I was okay, and I told her I was fine. I didn't want her to leave, but there was nothing I could really do to get her to stay either. I got her food backed up and called out her name. She was out the door and gone. "Alone again, aren't we?" I backed away from the counter when I noticed the man approaching again. He had this wide, creepy smile, and I hated every second of it. His teeth were yellow and chipped, and I didn't really want to experience that smell again. I backed away as he leaned over the counter and stared at me. That's when I finally built up the courage to tell him to leave. "We're actually going to be closing the restaurant early tonight, so if you don't mind, collect your belongings and exit. That would be great." I really tried to sound as nice and calm as possible. I didn't want to show any fear and make myself seem vulnerable in any way. To my surprise, he actually did leave. I watched out the window as he walked down the street and into the dark out of sight. I was able to breathe a sigh of relief. I went back into the office and grabbed the keys. I practically ran to the front door and locked it. I was so happy that I was locked in and no one could get to me. I didn't care if I got fired. I was closing and going home, where I knew I'd be safe. I was wiping down the cutting boards and singing a song to myself when I suddenly heard a crashing sound from the lobby, like one of the windows had just been shattered. I had an idea of what just happened, but I wasn't about to go and look. I just had this horrible feeling in my gut that the man had come back for me, and I had to hide right now. I had this thing where every time I entered a building, I would always come up with an escape plan first, if I needed to. This restaurant wasn't any different. I wasn't going at the back exit, just in case someone was there waiting for me. I went to the one place I knew I could hide where no one would find me. I grabbed my puffy jacket and went inside the walk-in freezer. I shut the door behind me, and as quietly as I could, I huddled in the back corner. There was a small space next to the roll-away metal shelving that I could just barely squeeze into. The boxes of burger patties and frozen fries covered most of where I was hiding. I was crouched down to the point that I was holding my legs tight against my body. I planned to stay there like that until I knew it was safe to leave. I could hear something outside the freezer door and things being moved around. I was in there for about 20 minutes. I hoped the ordeal would be over soon. I was literally shaking from fear and cold. I was grateful, though, that whoever was out there hadn't thought to look for me in the freezer yet. That gratitude wouldn't last, though. I sucked in a deep breath as I heard the walk-in door open. I peered through the shelves and saw the same boots and pants that homeless man had been wearing. I held my breath and did everything I could not to make any noise at all. My heart was racing so fast that I was literally holding back tears. I felt like I was going to pass out. "Baby girl, are you in here? Daddy just wants to talk to you. I know you need a nice cuddle." His voice was no longer soft, but loud and desperate. I wish I could explain the horror I felt in that moment. No words would be able to describe it, though. I let out the breath I was holding in and prayed to God he wouldn't hear it. Thankfully, he did not. He exited the walk-in and left the door open, letting some of the coldness out with it. I heard the sound of glass cracking and figured that meant he was crawling back out through the window he had broken to get in. It didn't matter to me, though. I had no plans to leave that spot until I knew for sure I wasn't in any more danger. Before anyone asks why I didn't call the police, by the way, this was at a time before cell phones, and I wasn't about to get up and go use the landline. Eventually, the walk-in stopped being so cold, and I ended up even falling asleep in that position. I woke up to the sound of people talking only feet from where I was still hiding. I looked through the shelves and was happy to see my manager and a police officer standing there over me. By that time, my legs had gone completely numb, and I couldn't move them at all. All I could do was call out for help. They were shocked to see me back there, and did help me get out. The officer sat me down in the lobby, and I told him everything. He promised that they'd keep an eye out for the man that I described, but he couldn't make any promises about catching him. I quit that job right then and there, and haven't stepped foot in that building ever since. Thank God I never saw that man again, which I was grateful for. I was also disappointed, though, that the police never even really seemed to make an attempt to find him. I eventually ended up going to therapy for a while because I stopped sleeping and eating from the trauma of that experience. I don't like thinking about it, but telling others the story has given me a weird sense of closure. My one piece of advice to anyone listening is to always have an exit strategy wherever you go, or at least a really good place to hide. This happened back in 2003. I used to work at a Walgreens, and if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's a popular pharmacy store chain that also sells a variety of other items. The stores are not that large usually, and generally are never too busy either. Most of the time, there's a pretty calm feeling inside. The store that I worked at used to be open 24 hours. I'm not sure if it still is, but I know that it was when I worked there. Usually, I was the one working overnights. I would be all by myself for most of my shift. There wasn't really a need to have anybody else there anyway, because I could handle everything, and we never got many overnight customers. I was also able to walk to and from work, which was a nice arrangement. I had an apartment that was just down the street and a couple blocks over, so it would only take me 10 minutes there and back. Usually, I worked 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and it wasn't that late yet when I walked into work. It wasn't too early when I walked back home. One time when I was working an overnight shift, Everything was going as normal. It was about 1 a.m., I believe. I remember I heard the automatic doors opening and glanced over to see a woman entering the store. She appeared to be about 40 years old and had dark brown hair. She was maybe 5'2" or 5'3" and pretty thin. After entering, the woman looked in my direction and said hello to me. I said hi back to her and she walked down one of the aisles. I focused my attention elsewhere. I was just standing behind the counter at the checkout. We only had 2 checkout lanes, but most of the time only one was open. Several minutes went by, and I occasionally saw the woman passing. I wasn't watching her or anything though. She just seemed to be a perfectly normal woman doing some shopping. At one point, I just happened to casually be looking around when I caught the woman standing half behind an aisle, holding a small video camera. She was holding it in such a way that it looked like she was filming me or taking my photo or something. I looked over at her wondering what was going on. It was like she was kind of trying to hide it too. She was about halfway obscured. I guess she thought I couldn't see her. I found this really strange. After a couple seconds of this, her camera went down and she disappeared fully into the aisle. I did think it was a bit odd, but not really the biggest deal. About a minute later, the woman walked up to the left near the exits. She said goodnight to me and walked out without even buying anything. I said goodnight to her too, but I was a little weirded out by the entire experience. After she was gone, I quickly forgot about it though. I mean, yeah, it was strange that she was filming me for some reason, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Hours went by and several more customers came in. All of them were pretty normal. When 6 a.m. arrived, I was off. Another coworker arrived, so I left Walgreens and headed back to my apartment. I was walking along the sidewalk, and it was still pretty dark out. Things were very quiet. Only the occasional car passing by me on the road was making any sound. As I was walking back, though, I started to hear something a little bit different. I could hear somebody walking a ways behind me. There were footsteps a good distance away. I was curious, but I didn't look back yet. I crossed over 1 block, and as I did, I glanced over. I saw the same woman was walking behind me. I found this really strange. After I crossed the street, I crossed another, and then went along that sidewalk. That would take me all the way back to my apartment, with no more turns needed. I didn't think the woman would follow me still, but she did. And that's when I started to really get creeped out. Her whole personality just seemed kind of mysterious. Even when she had spoken to me, she'd only said hi and bye really. The woman continued to walk behind me. She was a fair ways back. Soon I reached my apartment. I was really glad to see she hadn't seemed to gain on me or anything. She was about the same distance behind me. Now, you had to use your key to enter my apartment building. I had a separate key for my unit as well. This made me feel better. If I could just get inside, there was no way she'd be able to follow me. I knew for sure she didn't live here. I entered my building and went up to my apartment, which was on the 2nd floor. My apartment was at the front side of the building, so I could look out onto the street where the woman had been walking. After I got inside, I went to the window. I looked out and saw the woman standing there on the sidewalk. She already had her camera out again and appeared to be taking a video of me at my window. This was all so strange. I ducked down to get out of her sight. She was just taking a video of my apartment window. What was the point? How did she even know it was mine? After several minutes, I looked again, and she was gone. I went on with my normal routine after that. I would usually relax after work, then eventually fall asleep. Obviously, my hours of being awake were very different from most people, with me having to work overnight hours. I fell asleep at around 9 in the morning or so. When I woke up, it was almost 2 p.m. That was a little bit earlier than I usually woke up. I could hear the sound of somebody trying to open my apartment door. I walked over and looked through the peephole to see what was going on. What I saw was that very same woman walking away from my door. I just barely saw her, but I knew for sure it was the same person from before. I was now extremely creeped out by this. After she left, I didn't really know what to do. I watched her leave the building and walk away down the sidewalk rather quickly. I don't know how she even got inside. She'd probably snuck in as someone else was leaving, which was very possible. I decided to call the police and tell them everything. They came out to investigate, and I gave them all the information I could. I didn't really know what else to do. They said they would look into it, but after that I never heard anything more. I also never saw that woman again. It still creeps me out when I think about it. Obviously, I don't work at that same Walgreens anymore, and I haven't for many years now. I also don't live in that apartment or even the same city anymore. I still wonder what that woman was doing though. Why was she recording me? Why did she follow me? Why did she attempt to break into my apartment? I'm an 18-year-old kid in culinary school. This happened back in 2009. Our program has an underground parking lot attached to a lounge located behind the cafeteria. Couples like going there because it's always empty and partially dark. I really hated it though, because the back door to the parking lot was barely lit up. Barely anyone parked there either, so I just found it kind of creepy. Being a horror fan, I knew it was the perfect place with many opportunities for things to go wrong. Long story short, I came out of class one day, and this kid I didn't know started rushing up to me, all confrontational-like. I had my knife set with me, so I pulled out a handle, readying to defend myself. He stopped and handed me this paper. It read, "Meet me in the lounge." I looked at him in confusion and asked him who sent this note. Was it my boyfriend? Was it someone in the culinary program? Maybe a friend from high school or something? The guy shook his head and said he had no idea, but I should go anyway. I questioned him on what the person looked like, but he refused to give me any information. I chuckled nervously and put the note in my pocket. I walked past the kid to head to class. He started following me, asking me if I was going to go. I tried to ignore him and headed towards the library to get to a public place. He still followed me. He kept insisting I needed to go and that it was my destiny or some crap along those lines. I just glared at him and picked up the pace, trying to head downstairs to the cafeteria in hopes of finding a classmate and losing this guy. He ran at the same pace as me, telling me he didn't understand why I wasn't going right now. I told him I didn't want to and to leave me alone. I headed into the cafeteria. This guy was really creeping me out. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but instead I saw a classmate and ran right towards him. The kid followed me still, pointing toward where the lounge was and telling me I was going the wrong way. I told my classmate what was going on immediately. He approached the kid and told him to leave me alone. I already had a boyfriend and was not interested. The kid just told me, "They're waiting for you," and to not take too long. His words really gave me the chills. My classmate walked me to our student restaurant and asked for some others to accompany us. 3 of my other colleagues came with us to the lounge, but when we arrived, no one was there. I freaked out and decided I needed to go home. They walked me through the campus to the parking lot, where I called my parents to get a ride. One of the others stayed with me, while the classmate who defended me initially went to report the behavior to some teachers. He came back to tell me they were going to investigate and to keep an eye out for suspicious activity or that kid. A few days later, I learned various women had been assaulted in that area. They were people who parked there during finals and went in through the lounge. The school newspaper had reported it, but there were no details of who did it nor if they were caught. I felt my stomach drop. I reported my incident to the newspaper team as well. but they claim they never dealt with anything like that note. They never found the suspects either. My mom is glad I listened to my gut and didn't go. To this day, I still get chills thinking about it. The girls recovered, thankfully. They got jumped, but they had left them with all their stuff, so I guess they weren't there to rob them. They'd escaped with just a few minor injuries. I never saw that strange kid around campus again. All I can think of is, why did they pick me? I'm just glad everyone ended up okay in the end, and that I didn't get attacked too. Who knows what would have happened if I had gone with him? I need to preface this by saying I do not believe in ghosts or any other kind of paranormal activity, and this is not an attempt to convince people of their existence. What I will say, though, is I have an open mind regarding things I can't explain, using my logic or reasoning. I know something happened to me in this instance, I just don't know exactly what. And nothing I've heard offered so far has come near a satisfactory explanation. That's what had me so creeped out about it, though. If I could just chalk it up to seeing a ghost or witnessing a glitch in the Matrix or whatever, or any of that crap, at least I could draw a line under it and move on. But really I can't, because I have no idea what happened that night, and neither does anyone else. I used to work for a security company that contracted overnight work for large office buildings in downtown Houston. Some of the buildings were real nice places. Their security offices had all kinds of amenities. Others just didn't exactly. The only problem was, this made for some of the most boring overnight shifts you could possibly imagine. Sure, guarding something can be exhausting and sometimes dangerous, but boredom is an entirely different kind of poison altogether. You'll understand what I mean then when I say that out of all the places I expected my scariest guard job to be, office buildings didn't get anywhere near the top 10. One of the buildings we worked in had a bunch of different offices on each floor, with the layout of each floor being shaped like a letter U. Each of the floors were owned by a different company for the most part. Anyway, most had different designs, but the same layout. Part of that layout were these polished metal plates that sat in the corner of each corridor. They were positioned at the 90-degree angles of the U-shape. At first, I figured it was just an odd design choice for decoration, but I figured out they were supposed to be like mirrors. If someone was walking down the connecting corridor, you would be able to see their movement in the polished metal, so you wouldn't bump into anyone around the corner or get too much of a fright or whatever. This one night, I was working the overnight shift with 2 other co-workers. It came my turn to perform a physical sweep of the building. We had most of the building mapped out with cameras, but no security guard worth their salt relies solely on electronics to guard the building. Every half hour, one of the guards would take a quick walk around each of the floors, just to make sure everything was still A-OK. Most of the guys would just take elevators up and down, but it was around this time that I decided to take the stairs a few times a night. I wanted to try and get some exercise in, was a few pounds heavier than I wanted to be and all that. Still, walking up even 5 or 6 flights of stairs really sucked. I would take as many flights as I could manage and take the elevator the rest of the way. It also kinda helped to kill time on those hellishly boring shifts too. This one night I managed to walk all the way up to the 9th floor, which was a totally new record for me. I was also completely out of gas now. I had to lean against the wall to catch my breath. I made sure to stay in the stairwell's blind spots, so my coworkers wouldn't see me gasping for air and mock me. Once I had myself together again, I walked out into the corridor and towards the first bend in that U that I mentioned earlier. As I got within a few feet of it, I froze. For the first time in the whole time I'd worked there at night, I saw a reflection in that polished metal mirror thing. It was not 100% crystal clear, but something was 100% there. I could see someone standing in the connecting hallway, appearing to wear some kind of security uniform as well. I called out thinking it was one of my coworkers. As I watched them in this polished mirror, they suddenly took off running out of sight. Now right away, I was thinking this was just a prank. I'd caught them trying to jump scare me and they ran away. As I was walking around the corners checking the area, I was kind of calling offhandedly, "Hey, I know you're there, idiot. I saw you in the reflection, so why don't you come on out already?" I went around each corner, but I couldn't find the guy. I assumed he must have ducked into one of the conference rooms or offices. I checked each and every one, and they all appeared to be empty. I called down on my radio to make sure someone really was up there with me. Were they just hiding in a closet or something? My coworkers were the sort of immature idiots to pull something like this. The second I heard both other guys talking on the radio, though, I felt myself getting a little bit freaked out. They were in the same room, and they clearly weren't with me. Either I was having some kind of weird episode after power walking up those 9 flights of stairs, or it wasn't one of them. Either way, it wasn't a desirable outcome. I was starting to get a little bit worried. Not majorly worried, just a little bit. I decided to take the elevator the rest of the way, just in case it really was my exhaustion playing tricks on me. As I was walking back towards the elevator, though, something happened that made me feel cold just thinking about it today. I felt someone coming up behind me really quickly. I heard the footsteps that weren't my own, rushing up behind me. I felt that feeling of imminent danger you get when someone tries to attack you from behind. I whipped around with my hand on my sidearm, ready to defend myself, but there was no one there. It was just the empty corridor, with only me standing in it. I can't even really think of the words for the kind of fear I felt in that moment. I went towards the elevator at a speed walk, convinced that someone was up there with me, and they'd just tried to attack me. At the same time, though, either they had to be psychic or a real ninja to be able to rush up on me like that and then disappear. None of it made any sense. More and more, I was thinking there was something wrong with me. Something weird was going on. I was safely in the elevator now and called down to my coworkers. I asked them to watch all the cameras on the 10th floor for any kind of movement. They replied asking if I was all right or if I needed help. They could hear the kind of state I was in. I told them to just shut up and watch the cameras and tell me if they saw anything or anyone. I was expecting them not to see anything. I'd accept I was having some sort of medical emergency and call 911. I'd heard about people having strokes or heart attacks after doing strenuous activity and how they could feel confused and even see things. I was worried something like that was happening to me. As I was checking the area, though, my radio crackled to life again. I heard the next thing they said, and I swear to God, it felt like I was going to throw up. My coworker came back with a, Yeah, I see it. There's someone up there with you. We're headed for the elevator right now." I sent it down to the ground floor to meet them. If I'm being honest, I was sort of weirdly relieved I wasn't in the middle of having a stroke or something. I wasn't going crazy. There was really someone up there messing with me. They were gonna get one heck of a butt-kicking for scaring the Jesus out of me. We swept all the rooms together as a trio, calling out to this potential intruder the whole time. We were saying things like, "Come on out, it's only trespassing at this point." We were all trying to find this person. It was a big issue if we didn't find this intruder on the 10th floor, because that meant they must have slipped into the stairwell and they could be anywhere in the building. Instead of going around to hunt them on foot, we headed back down to the security office and decided to check all the cameras. We also called the police. On the way back down to the office, I asked my coworker what exactly he'd seen on the security camera. It turns out he hadn't seen anything really definitive. Just enough movement on the edges of the monitors to know that a person was definitely up there, and they seemed like they were sticking to all the camera's blind spots. This really sent alarm bells ringing for my coworkers. Stuff like that suggested someone must have cased the place, i.e. done a little recon in the daytime, possibly disguised as a client or employee. Whatever they'd come for, we had no idea, but they knew how to get in there without being spotted. A lot of people I'd told this story asked me how the person could have gotten in there in the first place. Honestly, I have no idea. We watched the cameras after we called the cops and tried to work out where the hell this intruder was. They seemed to be perfectly avoiding all the security cameras. We were staring at them for 15 to 20 minutes before the cops finally showed up. We hadn't seen any movement in the meantime. We helped them sweep all the floors and offices to make sure no one was around. They were pretty thorough about it too, opening closets, checking under desks. We found no one. Even the cops said it must have been spooky for whoever was up there alone, which to me sounded like the understatement of the century. Now that I was sure it wasn't just me starting to go insane, I was beginning to calm down again. Once the cops left, we switched the alarm systems from floors 9 to 13 on, meaning that if that person entered those floors again, we'd instantly be alerted. There were no alarms triggered that night, so we figured the episode was pretty much over and done with. We'd have to talk to the head of security about it, of course, and there'd be no doubt he'd be interested in how exactly we let something like that happen. We finished the shift as close to normal as possible, and then went home in a sort of good mood. It was only in the weeks afterward that I realized just how much the experience affected me. The longer I went on wondering about it, the worse the feeling got. Thinking I'd put it all behind me turned out to be a major error of judgment on my part. I thought about who it was that was up there with me. Why did they try to rush up behind me like that? How did they disappear and avoid being caught by everyone? After thinking about it for long enough, I decided I didn't want to work there anymore. When I was told that I couldn't pick and choose which places I was set to guard, though, I was left with no choice but to seek employment elsewhere. I'm not scared to admit that I'm afraid of whatever happened up there, and rather than go down some crazy rabbit hole trying to explain it, I thought it was better to just walk away and start again someplace else. I've never been attacked like that again, nor has anything like that happened to me. You can bet your bottom dollar, though, if it does, I'm moving my ass on again. I had a really strange and creepy experience when I went to Target several weeks ago. I went shopping for a few items. I go to Target all the time. After I got there, I was toward one of the far back corners of the store. It was very quiet, as the time was about 8:30 p.m. There were not many shoppers out anymore at this time. Out of nowhere, I saw a guy come from around a corner from the next aisle over. I realized he was a Target employee. He had dark brown hair and was somewhat tall, maybe 6 feet or so. He walked up to me and said hello, then asked me if I needed any help finding anything. I said no thanks. I knew where everything I was getting is, but I appreciated the help. He offered to show me some items that were on sale, which I also declined. He said okay and then just kind of walked off. Nothing was really too strange about this interaction. I simply continued on with my shopping, barely paying it any mind. I had taken maybe 15 more minutes inside the store, then headed to the checkout area. I paid for my things and left. I was parked toward one side of the store, about halfway back in the parking lot. I walked out to my car and began unloading all of my things into the trunk. When I was doing this, almost out of nowhere once again, I heard someone approaching me from behind. I turned around to see the same guy who had spoken to me inside of Target, but he was not wearing his employee uniform anymore. He was just wearing sweatpants and a black jacket, with the hood zipped up all the way. Even with that, I still instantly recognized him. I was very confused. The man asked me if I could give him a ride. I told him I wouldn't be able to do that. This guy seemed really sketchy. That's not even because of the fact that he had been working at Target 15 minutes ago and suddenly got off at the same time as me. After I said no, he just kind of stood there. I could tell he was going to ask me again, so I said, "Don't you work here? Can't you ask one of your coworkers or something for a ride?" He said no, he didn't work there. I told him he had just talked to me in the store a little bit earlier, but he completely denied it. Now I knew 100% that it was him. He was only seeming more and more sketchy to me. He told me he didn't need a ride very far, just a little ways down the road. I told him once again I could not do it. I turned around and went to get inside my car. I closed and locked the door. The man walked over to my driver's side. Luckily, nobody was parked directly in front of me, so I could just pull right out of the spot. I drove off, leaving him standing there. After leaving, I wondered what his deal was. Why was this random guy pretending to work at Target and approaching me asking for a ride? I really had no idea, but obviously something was not on the up and up here. I'm glad I managed to get away from him without any further trouble. A lot of people hate this city, but I would rather take the city over the wilderness any day of the week, especially after what happened to me and my friends a year ago. My one friend had just separated from her fiancé, who she had been with for about 7 years now. She was not doing super great with the breakup, which of course I don't blame her for at all. Her other friend, who is the outdoorsy type, suggested we all go away for a night and just camp out in the woods together. Surprisingly, she was into the idea. So the three of us found this cute little cottage in the middle of the woods to camp out in for a night. I was excited to have a night out with my girls that wasn't in the city or about getting all dolled up and all that jazz. Of course, once we got there though, my one recently separated friend got quite bored. I knew that was going to happen. She started looking up local bars in the area and eventually found this dive bar in a nearby town. Now that was my idea of camping. At least that's what I joked about with my friends. It was a nice change of pace though. We went on down to the local bar, and it was nice to not have to worry about the city scene. While we were at this place, it appeared to be just a handful of locals at the bar, and that's pretty much it, as far as I could tell at least. My friend started up a conversation with one of the guys. He was a middle-aged man who was very handsome, in a rugged sort of way. I don't know if it was the alcohol or just the feeling of being depressed, but whatever it was, she was flirting very heavily with this man. It went on for a while, but eventually she separated from him and told us she was ready to head back to the cottage with us. On the way back, we were giving her a hard time and teasing her about her bar friend. She just laughed it off, claiming it wasn't that big of a deal. When we got back to the cottage, we all had a glass of wine before we decided to go off to bed for the evening. It was clear at this point that camping was really not for us. We hated being in this little cottage with no Wi-Fi and nothing to really do. I knew our one outdoorsy friend meant well by setting this whole thing up, but it wasn't a good time for the rest of us. We all decided to sleep in the living room together. One of us on the couch, one of us on the love seat, and one of us in the recliner. It didn't take long for all of us to go to sleep. A little after 3 in the morning, though, I was nudged awake by one of my friends, who looked very concerned. She told me she had heard the doorknob kind of jiggling. I laughed at her and told her she was just imagining things, and that's when I began to hear it too. The doorknob really was shaking, and not just a little bit either. Whoever was out there was really trying to get inside. We were too scared to get up, so we just cuddled up together on the couch and held the blanket up to our faces. Since the cottage was so small, you could walk from the front door around the entire building in no time at all. And to our horror, that's exactly what the person outside did. We listened to each step outside as they were clearly sneaking around. We could make out every little twig snapping after each step. The person made their way around to the back of the cottage, which was behind the couch we were laying on. There was a large window at the back. The person went over to that window, and we started to hear shuffling on the other side of the curtain. It occurred to us that the person was trying to pull it open. I don't know what got into me, but I decided to yell that I was calling the police. The noise stopped for just a moment, and then a whisper could be heard from the other side of the window. It seemed to be a man's voice. He was whispering the name of my friend, the same friend who had been flirting with that man at the bar. My mind went to that guy right away. I refused to believe that he had followed us here, but there was no other way that he'd know we were at this house. I whipped open the curtain, and like a deer caught in the headlights, the man just stood there. It was, in fact, that exact same guy from the bar. He put his hands up in a sort of defensive position, and then just ran away. He didn't get into a car, at least none that I saw. We phoned the police right away, and reported what could have been a potential home invasion. I'm not sure anything ever came of it though, since we left first thing in the morning, which wasn't that long after the cops. It wasn't until the drive home that we really got ourselves worked up and scared. And that's when we started to piece together everything. We got back to the cottage before midnight, and the guy didn't bother trying to break in until after 3 in the morning. That means he had to have followed us to know where we were staying and waited for us to fall asleep for 3 hours. Only then did he try to get in. The thought of this man lurking outside for all those hours makes me want to throw up. I'm so thankful my friend woke up to the doorknob noise, because if she didn't, I don't know what would have happened to us. We found out after the fact the window had been unlocked, and it would have only been a matter of time before he would have gotten in. In a sick way, this trip really did help my friend, because she was so thankful to escape unharmed that she was able to put her life into perspective and start the long road of healing after a horrible breakup. I have a really crazy story from a while back. It was a few years ago now, but I'm a woman, age 23. I think I was around 20 or 21 at the time this happened. I was on Tinder and matched with this guy who I'll call Ryan for the sake of the story. After matching with Ryan, we began talking, and hit it off pretty well actually. That was really only the first night though. The next day, when chatting with him, I realized that he was actually sort of a jerk. He said a few things that were really rude, and overall, I just wasn't feeling it anymore. He asked for my Snapchat, and at that point, I told him no. This appeared to frustrate him quite a bit. He replied saying I was a big mistake and that I'd regret it, and some other stuff as well. He then said we should go on a date the next night. It took me by surprise. I said, "Really?" He gave me a time and location for the date, which was at a nearby bar. After he said that, I simply ignored him and did not reply. I figured he would get the idea and move on. The next day, he sent me another message though. Something along the lines of, "I'll see you tonight." And I thought about saying, "No, you won't," but I didn't do that. Instead, I continued to ignore him. He didn't say anything else during the day. That night, though, he sent me a message on Tinder, saying, "Where are you?" I figured it was just a joke, but I still didn't reply to him. There was another text later, saying, "Why didn't you show up?" I was just thinking to myself, did this guy really think I was going to go out on a date with him just because he said that? I never once told him I would agree to go with him. The next day, he sent me one final message on Tinder, which said, "I'm going to find you." After that, I blocked him. I couldn't believe I even matched with this guy in the first place anymore. During this time, I lived in a house I was renting with my roommate. It was smaller and had only 2 bedrooms. We each had our own room to ourselves. The next night after that, I was home by myself, as my roommate was away at work. I was on my bed just messing around on my phone. It was around 11 at night or something, when all of a sudden I heard this noise. It sounded like it was coming from outside, the bush right next to the window to be exact. My window was covered by a blanket from the inside. It was only a few feet away from me, so I got out of bed and went over to have a look. I lifted the blanket and instantly saw a man outside, crouched down in the bushes about 3 feet away. I jumped back. I was so freaked out. This was the last thing I was expecting to see. About 10 seconds later, I heard a noise from the window. The man was knocking on it. I reached for my phone and dialed 911 as fast as I could. I heard more noises at the window, but couldn't see what was happening. After dialing, I ran out of my bedroom and headed down the hallway for the living room. As I was leaving my room and going through the doorway, I heard a loud bang from the window. He might have been trying to break in or something. I had no way to know. I don't know. I told the 911 operator I thought someone might be trying to break into my home. Once I was in the living room, I felt slightly safer, but not too much so. I tried to get as far away from the bedroom as possible. I was told the police were on their way. I went over to one of the front windows and pulled back the curtain. I looked out of it, and when I did, I saw the guy was still there outside. He was at my same bedroom window, standing up and banging on it. I kept watching him. He turned and saw me for a split second through the window. As he started to move toward me, I closed the curtains and moved away. I ran over to the bathroom and locked myself inside. I waited until the police arrived. I couldn't really hear much from the inside, but if the guy broke in, I think I would have heard that. Eventually, the cops got there, and when they did, I came out of my bathroom. I ran for the front door and let them in. When I did, I was told they'd already caught the guy in my backyard. Apparently, it was the guy I had matched with on Tinder. I guess he had been at one of my back windows. Now, I don't know what his plan was exactly. Honestly, I can't believe it was happening. After that, I deleted Tinder. I hope if anybody who hears this uses dating apps, they're very careful. Wedding season is always a lucrative time of the year for me. I work for some fancy reception hall that hosts weddings pretty much every Friday and Saturday, from May until October. Some events are very fun and awesome, and others are horrible. Since the company is small and family-owned, they try to do everything themselves. Whenever it was becoming too much, they hired me. I'm basically a glorified handyman. I help set up the weddings, help assist with the wiring, and most importantly, I'm the guy who stays late and cleans everything up after. Especially on Friday nights, since Saturday another wedding will be taking place right after. I always like weddings that are small and quiet, because I'm not spending hours cleaning up the place after. Those folks tend to be a bit more reserved. In the story I'm about to tell you, it was the exact opposite. It was a gigantic wedding. Hundreds of people were there. We were at max capacity. As the night progressed, I could see the people getting more and more drunk and rambunctious. I was trying to clean and pick up in the background, while everyone was dancing and having a good time. There was only so much I could do, though, with a building full of people. I decided to take a long break and rest my eyes for a while everyone was still out having their fun at the wedding. I woke up 45 minutes later, and I noticed that the time the wedding would be ending was about 20 minutes or so from now. I could get started on my cleanup work once again. I grabbed my headphones and made my way from the parking lot to the building. As I made the long walk back up the hill, I was disgusted right away when outside it looked like a music festival had just come through. There was trash and empty bottles everywhere. I even saw a girl passed out in the middle of the grass. I went inside and the band was still playing. The inside was just as bad as the outside. Tables and chairs had been flipped over, bottles and cans were everywhere, even plates and napkins littered all over the floor. I was kind of angry, honestly. My bosses, the couple that owned the place, came up to me before the end of the wedding and apologized. They told me if I did a good job tonight, they would pay me extra, and I could take the next Friday off. Well, that seemed like a pretty fair trade-off to me. It took forever, but they finally started to empty out. They hired a bus to transport all these people wherever they were going, because these people were obviously in no position to be driving. They'd only rented 2 small party buses though, so they'd have to make multiple trips to pick everyone up. I was trying to grab up the tables and chairs, but because some people were still left behind waiting, they were throwing things and being inconsiderate. An hour and a half after the official ending time of the wedding itself, everyone was finally gone. My bosses had gone home for the evening. This was the time of night I didn't mind being alone though. My headphones in, working away, it was so peaceful for me. Since I knew I was going to be there a long time picking up after this party, I really needed that peaceful time to wind down too. I started from the outside and went side to side picking up trash and fixing all the furniture. That took quite a while. I then went inside and started working on the inside. It was getting cold outside, so I shut the door and continued on my work. A while later, my wireless headphones died. I figured I would just use the speaker from my phone, since nobody was around anyway. When I placed the phone on one of the tables, though, I noticed something quite strange. The door to the venue was now wide open, and I'd just shut it closed. I went over and called out to see if anyone was there. Of course, I heard nothing back. It was quite windy out, so I didn't think it was that outlandish an idea that maybe the wind had knocked it open. I hadn't locked it after all. It had never happened before, but it didn't mean it was impossible. I made some trips back and forth from the main hall to the kitchen. I was just about done for the night when I noticed the door I'd closed was now open once again. Now I felt uncomfortable. Maybe the owner was still around and I was being stupid and didn't realize it? I called out the owner's name several times, but I heard nothing back. I'm not an easily spooked guy, so my rational brain was telling me everything was still fine. All I needed to do was finish up and lock the door, then I'd be out of here. That's exactly what I did. I finished up, locked the door, and started walking to my car. When I was only about 30 to 40 feet away from the building, I saw the reflection of the lights in the glass. I stopped on a dime. I had just turned all the lights off. I turned around and saw they were shining brightly through the windows. I ran back, unlocked the door, and standing in the middle of the room was a man. He had suit pants on and a white buttoned-up shirt. Strangely, he wasn't wearing any shoes or socks. I could see right away that something about this guy was not right. His eyes were half open, and even though he wasn't moving, he was swaying back and forth, mumbling something to himself. I asked him if he was okay, and he started getting really agitated. "Where's my jacket? I want my jacket!" Clearly, this man had had too much to drink and seemed to have been left behind. I tried to be civil and told the guy to relax a bit. I'd help him out and find his jacket. I put my head down for a second to call the owner. At that moment, I had my head down. I heard his feet pounding hard on the ground. I looked up and he was running in the opposite direction. He ran into the kitchen screaming incoherently. I called the owner and told him what was going on. He said he would be right down since he only lived about 100 yards away. While I was talking to the owner on the phone, I described the man, so the owner could try and contact someone from the wedding. He called the best man since we had his contact information, as well as the bride and groom. They were still awake, luckily, but when my boss told them about the guy and described his appearance, they all said they didn't recognize him. There were so many people that it was possible he had been left behind, though. I was waiting for my boss to come back to the venue, and I decided to go into the kitchen and try and communicate with this guy. I turned the lights on and heard the scampering of bare feet on the ground again. I turned just in time to see the man lunging at me with a steak knife. It was in that brief moment I was able to block the swing and get away with just a shallow cut. I immediately backed out of the kitchen and slammed the door. This all happened in just a matter of seconds. My heart was racing now. I could hear the man jabbing his knife into the door on the other side. All I could do was sit there and try and hold it shut. At that moment, my boss walked in. I immediately yelled at him to call the police right now. I was stuttering my way through what was happening as I held that door shut. The man in the kitchen was screaming and stabbing the knife against the door over and over. He wasn't saying anything of substance really, other than occasionally mentioning his mysterious jacket. Thank God the police finally showed up and apprehended the man. He seemed confused as to why he was being arrested. The wedding party was contacted the next day, and to our horror, apparently nobody recognized the guy. He had not been invited to the wedding. When they finally got the pictures developed and scoured through every photo, they didn't find any pictures of this man. That is, except for one single picture toward the end of the night. It showed a group of men and women smoking cigars around a small bonfire outside, and in the background you can just see the guy walking up the hill toward the venue from out of the woods. It was blurry, but it was very clearly that guy. We have no idea where that guy came from or what his ultimate intentions were. From what I was told by my boss, he may have just been a crazy person. Maybe, though, he was just some drunk trying to crash a wedding for some free booze. We have no idea. Ever since that night, though, I don't wear my headphones so I can hear my surroundings, and I always lock the door every time I go in and out. For some backstory, my fiance, 28, and I, 21, recently got an adorable 2-year-old German Shepherd back in the end of February. She's been a great addition to our family and loves her mama a lot. I've had many dogs in my childhood, but I've never had one as loyal or as smart as my current one. Now, this encounter happened just a few weeks ago, but my mind still goes back to it every once in a while. I thought I would share it with all of you. My fiance and I live together in an apartment complex, which is nice as it offers some nice amenities for our new pup, like a dog park and a large plot of grass right outside our apartment. We usually take our pup to this space of grass to let her run around and do her business whenever she needs. On this day, though, my fiance and I decided to take her out together and get some fresh air. It was really hot, around 90 degrees plus, so I was only wearing a sports bra and some shorts, trying to combat the overwhelming heat. I was walking her and taking her up and down the hill until she got done doing what she needed to do. And that was when I noticed her turn to where there were some other cars parked. She was the type of dog who loved other dogs, but didn't care one bit about humans. I assumed there must be another dog around. Instead of turning back to finish her business, she kept her eyes on the cars, purposefully positioning herself between me and them. A few seconds later, I watched as a man exited from around them. I had not noticed him before because he'd been hiding in some foliage. During all of this, my fiancé was a little out of it, so we hadn't noticed anything. As the man walked around the cars and down the road around the grass, my pup was tracking him with her eyes, keeping separation between the man and I. Eventually, the man stopped and pulled out his phone, pointing it up to the sky to take a photo. My fiancé, being the goof he is, stared up at the sky too and made a comment about how beautiful it was. Because my pup was so entranced with this guy though, I was staring at him too. I had a feeling that something was wrong with him. My pup doesn't care about other humans. They would walk by at any time and she would not give them a second glance. But for some reason, she was stuck on this guy. I watched as instead of taking a photo of the sky, he turned his phone subtly toward me and tried to take a photo of me. Now, I know I was somewhat scantily clad, but it was really hot, and all I was doing was taking my dog out, nothing else. I locked eyes with the man as he turned his phone. I could tell it freaked him out, getting caught trying to snap photos of me. He hurried away after getting caught, my pup and I watching as he ran down the road. I haven't seen him since that incident. I don't think he was actually a person who lived in the complex. He was just kinda there for some reason that day. I'm happy my German Shepherd was looking out for me. She got plenty of treats when we got back inside for that. This story took place a few years ago now. I know looking back that this situation could have been handled better on my part. I feel sort of dumb even telling it, but I want other people to hear it so they can learn from my mistakes. I was 19 years old and was at my parents' house. My older sister and her boyfriend were staying over. We lived in a very populated neighborhood. There were lots of houses on my street, and many on other streets nearby as well. Our house was sort of at the end, and probably the biggest one. We were hanging out one night. Our plan was to get some pizza. My mom made the order, and I offered to go pick it up for her. I had recently gotten myself a new car, and I really enjoyed driving it whenever I could. I knew that we could have had the pizza just be delivered, but we would always just go get it at the pizza place anyway. It was just a little over 5 minutes away, so it wasn't a big deal. Plus, we could save some money on the tip. I left the house at sometime after 7 p.m. or so. The sun had already set, and it was pretty dark out by now. I went out to my car and was parked at the top of our driveway. I backed out and into the street. As soon as I finished backing out, I noticed a car parked on the side of our street with its headlights on. A little ways back, there were not a lot of cars parked on the side of the street typically, but it was also not super uncommon. When I started driving away though, what was uncommon was for the car to start immediately driving behind me. I approached the stop sign at the end of our street, and when I reached it, the car was right on my tail. I turned and so did this car. It was the really close following distance that really made me nervous about this guy though. I was just driving the normal way to the pizza place, but this car was right up on my bumper. I continued down the street a little ways, and at the next turn, once again the car followed behind me. And that's when I went from just thinking this was an overly aggressive driver to someone who was deliberately following me. I had no clue why someone would want to follow me though. I turned again and sort of pulled over to the side of the road. I wanted the car to go around me. Instead, they just pulled over right behind me. I really started to panic. I had no clue what to do. I got out my phone and called my mom. When she answered, I told her I was being followed and I wasn't sure what to do. As I was talking, I pulled out and started making random turns. The car followed right behind me. I was trying to lose them, but I was not able to do so. My mom told me to come back home, and if the car was still following me when I got back, she would call the police. I kept driving, now headed back for home. It took about 5 minutes or so. The car was behind me the entire time. When I got back to our street, I pulled into the driveway. The car did not pull in after me. Instead, it drove a little ways down the road and parked in the exact same spot it had been before. After I parked my car, I got out and sprinted for the front door. I got back inside and showed my parents from the window where the car was. It was still just parked right there. We couldn't quite see the license plate from our distance, but we called the police anyway. About 5 minutes later, the car drove away. When the police got there a little while after it had already left, I talked to them and told them my story. We were all very disappointed the car had gotten away. After the police left, I was nervous it would come back. After that, though, I never did see it again. Looking back, I should have just drove to a police station while the car was following me. I could have called the police in advance as well. I probably shouldn't have just gone back home, but I guess the car already knew where I lived anyway. I'm still not exactly sure what was going on there, though, or why this guy followed me. I've worked with some crazy people in the food service industry, but no one can compete with the guy I'm about to tell you about. I've been working at this specific Mexican place for a little over 2 years now. One day, one of our employees quit quite out of nowhere, so we hired someone pretty fast. It probably would have been better to get someone with a little more experience, but I was also involved in the hiring process, and this guy seemed perfectly fine. We needed someone quickly, and we only had one applicant. He started his shift the Saturday after his interview, and because it was so busy during the lunch rush, we had him doing dishes. There was no time to train him to cook that day. This may seem weird to other people who work in a restaurant as well, but at ours we didn't have someone who only does the dishes or only cooks or whatever. We would all help out with any task whenever anyone had a free moment. The only problem with this was this new guy David absolutely despised doing the dishes for some reason. I get it, it's not exactly fun and no one loves that part of a job, but he made sure to let everyone know just how furious it made him. He'd stand in the back doing dishes and slam them down in the sink or throw them into the shelves. It was to the point where the noise actually started to scare the customers. He was asked to stop and did so for around 30 minutes, then went back to throwing dishes around and screaming and cussing about how bad his life was. It was incredibly cringy, but we needed his help, so we couldn't afford to fire him. This particular day, I decided to sit outside and eat my lunch. I was sitting facing the parking lot. I don't think David had realized that I was sitting outside because he went out to take a smoke break. He opened the front door of the restaurant and slammed it closed behind him, then made a gun shape with his hand and shoved it in his mouth, acted like he was shooting himself in the head. On his way back to his car, he started yelling into the open air about how much he hated this place and everyone in it. My mouth was just hanging wide open. I was witnessing a grown adult throwing a tantrum like he was a big baby. It only got worse from there. His car was facing directly where I was sitting. I got to watch him as he got inside. He slammed the door closed and proceeded to scream and thrash around, banging his head on the steering wheel and slapping himself in the face for 3 minutes straight. The worst part is, I'm not even exaggerating at all. I could tell this guy was nuts. I felt like he must have been on something. I went inside and told my coworkers about what I'd seen. One of them said they weren't even surprised. I was confused and asked her why. She said she had worked with him at another restaurant years earlier, and he had been fired for some sort of behavior. That I should be careful and do what I could to avoid being with him. In the meantime, it was very concerning. I went to the owner, who basically said, "It is what it is, and if he's not hurting anyone, he can't be fired." I think his exact words were, "We all have bad days." Well, this was worse than a bad day, though. It ended up being a horrible and disgusting 2 months working with this man. He started training to be a line cook about 2 weeks after he started working with us. I thought that was kind of gross considering he had some of the worst hygiene I'd ever seen. He reeked of cigarettes, had long hair, and had disgusting long and dirty fingernails that just seemed to get worse as the days went by. It was so bad his nails would pop through his gloves and drop dirt constantly. He didn't even care. He would only change them when someone else noticed. The things I mentioned so far might not seem that bad, but what he did next brought it to a whole new level. I got this feeling he started to feel like he could do anything he wanted and wouldn't get fired, since he'd gotten away with so much up to that point. We didn't have a large staff, so he was left alone to cook sometimes. That's when we started getting a lot of complaints about the food. People would find hairs or tell us their food didn't taste right. We had one guy tell us he was 100% positive there was someone spitting in his beans. Let me tell you, I could really see it. We were lucky to talk him out of calling the police, and instead gave him a voucher for free food for 6 months. We decided it would be best not to leave David alone in the kitchen anymore. That really seemed to upset him. He wasn't a team player at all. My manager was given the okay by our owner to do whatever it took to make him quit. Basically, just make his life miserable. We could have had him fired, but I guess there's more paperwork involved when you fire someone. David was told to do dishes all day, spray out the trash cans, clean the grease traps, scrub the floors, basically all the stuff no one else wanted to do. I thought he was creepy and scary enough already, but the second we started giving him jobs he didn't want to do, he became almost evil. I'd bring him dishes and he'd start screaming at me and even making fun of the way I looked. I really didn't understand the hostility, but whatever. I stopped interacting with him at all at one point. It became obvious when any of my coworkers had been talking to him because they would come back in tears. The guy was ruthless. The last day he ever worked with us, he did something so gross, we ended up having to call the police on him. He had cooked that day because one of the other cooks had called out. I was standing in front of the restaurant when he walked in and noticed him holding a water bottle behind his back filled with a yellow substance. I figured it was Gatorade or he had a drink powder in it or something. He went back and washed his hands, which was a shocker in and of itself. He usually had to be told to do that. I didn't see his water bottle anywhere after that. The day went on, and for dinner we had a special. There was a broth-based soup. I was waiting tables and was confused when literally anyone who ordered the soup complained it tasted terrible. I told the manager who tried the soup as well. They agreed. Only when he said, "This tastes like piss," did I put 2 and 2 together. I started screaming, "Oh my God," over and over again. I didn't even know what to do. Everyone was asking me what I was freaking out about. I looked over at David, and he looked at me with wide eyes. He mouthed the word no. They looked over at him when they saw my eyes dart over to him. That's when he decided to make a break for it. The only problem was the way out of the kitchen was directly through all of us. He lunged forward, and my manager threw him to the ground. I was able to tell them what I'd seen. There was zero hesitation. We called the police immediately. They arrived and found the bottle he'd brought in. It was indeed filled with his urine. He was arrested, and the soup was tested as well. Unfortunately, it was tainted with his bodily fluids, not just urine either. The restaurant was closed for a while after that. I quit before it even reopened. I decided an office job was much more suitable for me than this. David was charged with tampering of consumer products and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. I was glad that he actually got some prison time. Honestly, I think he deserves it. Hopefully, when he gets out, he's not someone I have to encounter ever again. A few years back, I was working as an overnight security guard at a company. I don't remember exactly what it was. It wasn't that popular or anything. I worked at a lot of different places back then doing security. It was a pretty easy job. I would mostly just sit at a desk literally all night, and nothing ever happened. Most shifts, I wouldn't even talk to anyone. Sometimes I'd talk to 1 or 2 at most. I could just go on my phone, look around, and get paid for it. At this one particular company, it was a pretty standard office building for the most part. Inside was a lobby. I would sit at the desk in there and had a computer with some basic information. The building was not really near anything else in particular. It was slightly secluded, and the only other people there overnight were the security guard, a janitor, and the other security guard. The other security guard would mostly just be outside. I knew both him and the janitor, and I didn't see them very much, other than when I would arrive or leave. Maybe sometimes when the janitor would clean the lobby as well. One night, I would guess around 1 in the morning or so, I was sat behind the counter. I would occasionally look around, and my view was mainly of the front door and window next to it. Outside of that was a parking lot, which was empty. Behind the parking lot was a fence. I was just casually looking around, when all of a sudden I saw a guy walking up to the door. He looked inside and faced me. It was really strange to see, because nobody had ever come to the door before. I realized that this man who was standing at the door was smiling the creepiest smile I had ever seen. His eyes were so wide, they looked like they were about to pop out of his sockets. It was very unsettling. He had to be joking or something. The man did not try to enter the building though. He just stood there at the door and kept staring at me. I wasn't sure what the man wanted, so I waved at him. He did not wave back to me. He moved out of sight, and I couldn't see him anymore. I was really confused by what was going on here. I had no idea where this guy had come from, nor what he was doing exactly. I tried to just brush it off. I figured the outside security guard would find the guy soon enough. I called him to let him know this guy was here, but he hadn't seen the guy at all. I got up and walked over to the door to look around. The guy was nowhere to be seen. I went back to my desk and was there for the next 30 minutes or so. When I looked up, the guy came back. I looked up and there he was just standing at the door, staring in at me again with the same creepy smile. This time, I got up right away. As soon as I stood up, he moved out of sight. I walked over to the door and opened it up. The man was now gone. He must have run off somewhere. I walked around outside to look for him and eventually found the other security guard. I told him about what was going on, and we talked for a while. Neither of us knew where the guy had gone. We looked around the property, but we couldn't find him. He must have left. I went back inside. The property was large enough that he could have easily evaded us. Don't ask me why, but there were hardly any security cameras outside. There were tons inside, but only 2 outside the building. They didn't even cover that much space. For the rest of the night, I didn't see the man. In fact, I never saw him again. I still wonder who he was and what he was doing there. I worked for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for 8 years, and in that time I only ever had to draw my sidearm once. A lot of other cops might tell you that's kind of miraculous, and I should consider myself lucky. I do, in a manner of speaking. Those same cops, though, might also admit that my one drawing of my firearm was worth 3 or 4 of their own, purely on sheer circumstance alone. I was driving through North Vegas one night after getting a call to the 7-Eleven on East Owens Avenue. On my way back towards the Strip, I was slowing down as I came upon some lights. And that's when I spotted something weird on James Street to my right. There was a car parked on the sidewalk with all the lights inside the car switched on. It looked like the driver was slumped over in an unnatural position. I didn't have any other calls, so I figured I'd drive around the block and roll past them real slow, just to see if this guy was okay. Lo and behold, there was a guy passed out in the driver's seat of his car. After a quick look around the driver and passenger side to check for weapons, I knocked on the guy's window a few times to wake him up. The guy looked maybe to be in his late 30s or so. Hispanic with a closely cropped haircut. He was wearing what looked like work gear. When I knocked on his window, he woke up startled. The first words out of his mouth were, "Oh my God, officer, I'm so sorry. This is literally my house right here." I nodded off after I parked here. I asked him where he'd come from, and he told me he worked nights at the chemical plant over in Henderson. He'd spent all day doing something for his family and had to work right after, so after running on almost 24 hours of no sleep, he just passed out of sheer exhaustion. Normally, I'd perform a field sobriety check on this guy or something, but he genuinely did seem to be exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot and his speech was groggy. He didn't smell like booze and his ID checked out. There was something that didn't sit right with me though. I asked him which chemical plant he worked for. He said something like Olin chloralkali, but I had a cousin in the chemical industry and he worked in the same industrial park. There was only one single company there named Borman Company, and if he didn't work there, he wouldn't have been working on anything. I ran his ID, and the guy didn't seem to have any criminal past. It was nothing but a few late parking fines. I figured just to be certain, I'd run a field sobriety test. In the worst case scenario, I'd minorly inconvenience this dude and he'd just go into his house and understand my reasons for doing so, given how suspicious he was being. The other scenario was I'd find out what was making my spidey senses tingle about this guy. It was a small lie to catch the guy in, but when that happens, you have to ask yourself, well, why is that guy lying about this thing if it's no big deal? I headed back over and asked if he'd mind undergoing a sobriety check. He said, "No, not at all, sir." There was an awkward pause before he said, "Do you want me to do it now?" I nodded and he looked back at me, as if to say, "Really? I thought we were cool." I promised to make it fast as possible so that if he really did live in this building, he could just go inside and go to bed, but I didn't want to risk letting a dangerous driver go. As this all happened, the guy's arm, which had been resting on the door where he'd rolled down the window, disappeared behind it to where I couldn't see. I took a quick step toward the guy and told him very politely to keep his hands where I could see them. He threw them both up and said, Okay, chill out." They started drooping down again though. He kept telling me it was okay, he didn't have any weapons in the car, he was just trying to unlock the door. I told him to unlock the door with his other hand then. In a split second it happened. He grabbed a gun tucked behind his back on the driver's seat. I was so focused on his left arm that I'd figured he was just reaching down for leverage. He pushed himself forward and started shooting at me. One of the bullets went straight through my arm. My gun was in my right hand though. I dropped back out of his arc of fire and started firing back. I put bullets into the driver's seat and into the man's center of mass. My left arm started to go numb and stopped working on me, so I had to grab my radio with my right hand and call it in. It was a swift firefight. A few well-placed shots though, and the man was in no position to fire back anymore. I was scared out of my mind. I didn't want to shoot the guy again, but disarming or detaining him at this point was out of the question, especially thanks to the fact that my left arm was no longer working anymore. I remember I stopped barking commands at him for a second, only to hear the guy weakly say something like, "Why'd you shoot me, man? I'm outside my house." He said it like he hadn't just pulled a gun and started shooting at me first, like I'd just shot him for being asleep in his car or something. That happens way more often than you'd think, too. I remember I once watched a woman flee a traffic stop, crash her car into a family's SUV, and try to stab the officer who pulled her out of the wreck of the car. Then she just laid there saying she didn't do anything. I guess some people get real scared when they think they're going to jail, be it first-timers or serious offenders. Sometimes they choose death over giving up whatever they've got going on. For example, the guy who blew up my left arm. With the way he pulled out his gun and started firing with no issue, you'd think he was a cartel member with hundreds of warrants out for him. But no, this was a guy who'd never been in trouble with the law before. He just couldn't face going without the oxys he was hooked on. That's what my officers found in the car. a bottle of oxys with no prescription. Now, with no priors and a good attorney, he could have easily gotten himself a suspended sentence and counseling at the worst. Maybe 6 months of probation with good behavior. But the thought of him having to detox in jail made him do something he couldn't come back from. I guess some people really do think that's a fate worse than death. I'm a former Target employee and worked in the clothing department mainly. I worked there for 7 months total, and I liked working there too. It was a good job, and most of the coworkers as well as the customers were nice, which could be a rarity somewhere else. There was one coworker I had some problems with though. There was this guy named Ed, and he worked in the electronics department. Over time, I got to know him a little bit. Not that well, though. There's a lot of turnover at a store like Target, but also many employees that stick around. The people in all departments that worked there for most of the time that I did, I recognized or got to know very well. I only spoke to Ed briefly once or twice for the first several months. I was much closer with many of the other coworkers. One time, I was taking my break and was by myself in the break room. I think it was a little bit later at night, and that's why nobody else was in there. Well, just a couple minutes after I got in, there Ed entered and started talking to me. He was friendly for the most part and asked me some general questions about myself. I was friendly back to him. 5 minutes into the conversation, he asked if I wanted to hang out with him and suggested he could come over to my house. Now, I didn't really want to hang out with him outside of work, and I especially didn't want him coming over to my place. I said I didn't think I could, and changed the subject. It was kind of awkward. We talked for the rest of my break. Well, it was mostly Ed doing all the talking. I was just listening, really. Eventually, I was back to work. I didn't really see Ed for the rest of my shift that night. But over the next week or two, he started to talk to me more and more. He would go out of his way to see me and asked me again if he could come over to my house. He was starting to be a bit of a creep, to be honest with you. After that, though, I kind of stopped seeing him around. I didn't really think about it that much until I heard he had been fired. I didn't get any details on why he'd been fired, or exactly when either. I also didn't really give it that much thought, other than realizing I wouldn't be seeing him around anymore. For the next week or so, work went on as usual. One day, I was not at work, but back home in my apartment. I got a text message from Ed. At first, I didn't know who it was because I didn't have the number saved. I was a part of a large Target group chat with a bunch of us co-workers, though, and anybody in it could see my number. I guess that Ed was still a part of it. He texted me and said that it was him. He told me he was going to come over to my house. I was just thinking, what's up with this guy and going to my house? I texted him back telling him to please not come. I said it was nice to work with him at Target, but I didn't think we should hang out anymore. I expected him to understand, considering we barely knew each other, but apparently he did not. He didn't respond to what I said, so I wasn't sure if he was mad or if he decided to ignore it or if he didn't even read it. A few hours went by, and that night I was still at home. I lived by myself in an apartment, which was on the first floor of my building. It was around 9 o'clock at night when Ed texted me back finally. He said that he was at my house right now. When I read those words, I instantly started sweating, and my heart began racing. How exactly did he know where I lived? Was he really at my house? I started to write something, but I didn't know what to say. I went over to my door and looked out the peephole into the hallway. Nobody seemed to be there. Maybe he was at my apartment, but not in the building yet. I looked out my back window as well and didn't see anything. I hoped he wasn't actually there, but it was a really strange thing to say if he wasn't. I texted Ed back saying I wasn't at home. I thought maybe that would make him leave and give up if he really was there, or at least deter him from coming over if he wasn't. He responded immediately, "Yes, you are. You're home. I saw you." When I read that text, I started looking around like a paranoid person. My mind was racing. I was thinking crazy thoughts, like maybe he was already inside my apartment somehow, hiding under the bed or something. Of course, that wasn't it. I looked in all my rooms and texted him back, asking him where he was. He just kept saying, "At my house." I was confused by this. I looked out the peephole and the windows again, not seeing him anywhere. I started to think that maybe he was just messing with me. At least, that's what I was trying to convince myself of. I went back over again to my peephole and looked out. I was looking out of it for a minute straight, but there was nobody around. I turned around, and then I saw him. He was standing on my patio right outside my sliding door. He was looking in at me. I screamed like crazy, and then ran for my bedroom. I locked myself inside and called the police. A few moments later, I heard knocking on my sliding door. I got another text from Ed telling him to let me in and asking me why I was screaming so much. I ignored it and told the 911 dispatcher the situation. They told me an officer would be there shortly. Ed tried calling me over and over, but I didn't answer. I ignored it, and he texted me several more times. I put my phone down altogether because I couldn't even bear to look at it right now. It was then that I started to hear a loud banging coming from my sliding door. It seemed he really wanted me to let him in. This went on for the next several minutes. It honestly felt like forever. At last, the police arrived. I heard Ed talking with them loudly, and I left my room. I soon saw him talking with officers. They eventually got him to leave. I spoke with the officers myself and told them my side of the story. Ed ended up getting a trespassing charge for my apartment's property, and he was told not to come back ever again. Luckily, I haven't seen him since then. I haven't heard from him either. Obviously, I blocked his number and stuff. Hopefully, I never hear from him again. It's one of the scariest moments that's ever happened in my life. This freaky story happened to me a few years back, when my wife was still my girlfriend. We decided to make an impromptu camping trip. I'd never camped much, other than a few times with a friend of mine. My girlfriend used to camp all the time with her family when she was younger though, and she really wanted to do it again. She thought it would be a great chance for she and I to spend some time together, away from all the noise of the city that she and I lived in at the time. She went all out and bought a bunch of awesome camping stuff. Amongst the items she bought was a nice new tent. It was a bigger tent, especially for 2 people, but I never minded more room. That was always okay with me since I was a bigger guy. At the time of this story, one thing I really liked about this tent, which I found out later on that most tents actually have, was that it had a little window thing on it, so you could see what was outside. At night, I knew it was going to be dark, but just the ability to be able to see and have the light shine in on us in the morning was a comforting thought for me. We arrived at the desolate camping location in the afternoon. We were only staying 2 nights, so we wanted to make the best of the trip. That first afternoon, we didn't really do much, just kind of chilled, set up the tent, and went to bed early. I was loving my little window. I was able to stare around outside with it while I was laying in my sleeping bag, and because of where the tent was located, I was able to see a good view of the night sky. It was beautiful. Just as I expected, the light blasted through the window in the morning. It was almost like waking up in my own bed. We got out of bed early that day and really made the most of it. We went fishing, hiking. We were also able to spend a considerable amount of time laying around relaxing and enjoying each other's company. We were on track to having another early night. I was alright with that though. Neither one of us has ever been a night owl. We were beat from everything we'd done earlier in the day. We got all cozy in the tent and I made sure I propped my window screen open. While I was starting to drift off, I thought I'd noticed something outside. It kind of looked like movement, but I didn't know if I'd dozed off for a second or if I was really seeing something out there. I sat up, and before I could get a good look, my girlfriend said, "Did you see that too?" I told her I thought I'd seen something, but I wasn't sure. We both stared out our little tent window. It just looked like a peaceful night. My girlfriend gasped. It sounded like air had been sucked out of her. To this day, I've never seen the expression she had in that moment. Sitting on a tree branch about 30 to 40 feet away was a person. They were wearing one of those weird fake president masks, and while sitting in the tree, they were sort of kicking their feet back and forth like a child on the swing would do. We both just sat there like sitting ducks. I was terrified because we hadn't seen one single other person the entire time we'd been out here. All of a sudden, there was a creep with a mask so close to us. I felt like crying, but I was trying to be brave since my girlfriend was already in tears. I knew the person wasn't directly doing anything to us, but the unsettling nature of the situation made us uncomfortable. We watched the guy for about 5 minutes, just sitting there in his tree, tilting his head back and forth as he observed us. He then jumped down. The person didn't approach the tent, but that feeling they were going to rush us at any second never went away. It felt like forever that the person was just pacing around outside our tent. Then they just stopped and didn't move. He didn't sway, he just stood still like a statue. A couple minutes later, the person turned to face the tent head on. We could hear them laughing under the mask. The person started to wave right at us, even with the mask on. It felt like the person was staring directly at me. The wave wasn't like a little friendly wave. The person was erratically waving their hand back and forth like they were trying to rip their own arm off or something. The person stopped waving abruptly, did a strange twitch, and then stood stock still. In a muffled voice we could barely hear, he called out to us, Hey guys, bye guys." He then literally ran full speed off into the woods. We just sat there and continued staring out the window all night long. We both may have dozed off at different points, but we mostly stayed awake the entire time. The guy in the mask never did come back. There was no evidence of where he'd come from. That was the most disturbing part. Whoever this was knew that we were there, and we had no idea how long he'd been out there watching us. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. He could have been out there following us for days for all we knew. I guess all things considered, we were lucky since he didn't do anything to us. Even though we were physically unharmed though, mentally this still left us messed up for a while. We're still thinking about it to this day. We've gone camping several times since that night, but from now on we'll only stay in a cabin with doors we can lock. I was a kid with my parents and little brother in Thousand Islands, New York. We rented a couple rowboats and went out to one of the islands. My dad was exploring the other side, and my mom said she was going to take one of the boats and row around to see him from the water. My brother and I begged her not to. A storm was rolling in, and it was getting really windy. She ignored us. I think I was maybe 10 and my brother was about 8. Well, my mother rowed out and got herself caught in the wind. She was being pushed out away from the island and couldn't get back no matter what she did. My dad came back, and we told him what our mom had done. He took me out in a boat with a rope to try and tow her back in. We got out to her easily enough. The wind was pushing us away from the island and my little brother. We attached her to our boat with the rope and started towing her back to the land. The thing is, it was not as easy trying to go against the wind. Rowing with my dad against that gale force was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It felt like we weren't moving at all, no matter how hard we tried. We were getting exhausted. I really thought we were going to run out of energy and be pushed even further away, leaving us to die and leaving my brother abandoned on that island. We eventually did make it back. I was so exhausted and sore that I couldn't even bring myself to stand up. I was a really athletic kid too, doing martial arts and sports. I was furious with my mom for doing something so stupid. I told her I was not going to listen to her for a month on the drive back home. My dad brought this up a few months ago, and I realized even to this day I'm still pissed at her for it. And no, she never did apologize. She saw nothing wrong with risking our lives for her own stupidity. She's very much not a smart person. I remember just standing there crying once we reached the shore because I really thought I was going to die. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.